J.K. Rowling was nearly homeless when she wrote the first Harry Potter book. Stephen King penned Carrie in a small desk wedged between a washer and dryer. James Patterson worked in advertising and famously crafted the Toys R Us theme song long before becoming an author. Join New York Times bestseller J.D. Barker and a panel of industry powerhouses as they pull back the curtain on some of the world's most prolific authors. Where did they start? What is their process? The biggest names in publishing all have origin stories, all have tips and secrets. What does it take to consistently top the bestseller lists and become a household name? Get your notepad out. School's in session. This is Writers Inc.
Hey, it's JP Reinflush.
J. Kevin Tomlinson.
And JD Barker. Welcome to this special bonus episode of Writers Inc. Apparently, everybody has to have a J in their name today.
I'm not being left out on this one. No way.
So I've honestly been trying to scale back on the bonus episodes because who wants to listen to us more than once a week? But this one came out of left field, and there was just no way we could say no to it. So we've got Rob Savage on. He's the director of Boogeyman, which was just released on this past Friday, so it's in theaters now. We're going to skip the news, everything else, and just get right into it. So here he is, Rob Savage.
When there are scary things we don't understand, our minds try to fill in the blanks. Sometimes the best thing to do is to face it. So this light is going to be completely solid like it is right now. Then gradually, it's going to start flashing until it's totally dark. So you can see that there's nothing to be afraid of. Okay? See? That's not so scary, is it? Just you, your sister, and me. You're doing okay. It's not real. It's okay. It's okay.
So you've filmed through Zoom and using a dash cam. What is the strangest place you've had to place a camera?
Mostly trying to get shots from inside things. So, you know, in Boogie, we've got a bunch of shots from inside toilets and all this kind of stuff, which it's always amazingly difficult to get those shots, which, you know, Breaking Bad makes look so easy. We're to break off the top of a toilet and put it on top of a camera. And it was all for a shot that's on screen for about half a second. But then, yeah, I mean, the shots that look the easiest in host and dash cam are actually where the camera falls and you just happen to catch something out of the cut. They're so incredibly hard to do, and we ended up building these weird gimbal things for the iPhone, so it would fall in just a certain way so we could get the shot. So it's it always amazes me that the kind of the nuts and bolts behind some of the shots that seem the simplest.
Definitely. It's fun hearing the behind the scenes of things that are seem like such simple shots, but definitely are not. I'm curious though, what ignited your passion for the horror genre and how did you start that journey?
I think because it was taboo. I mean, it was the thing that my parents didn't let me watch. They didn't let me read. So, you know, I knew people like Stephen King and Clive Barker when that was out of reach for me. And so it was what I was always striving towards. And the same with horror movies. My parents tried valiantly to raise me with no TV and certainly no scary movies. And so immediately I just wanted to watch the goriest, nastiest, scariest stuff. And I think, you know, I got an illicit thrill out of watching the splattiest movies. And then it was films like Hellraiser. I remember having a really profound reaction to Hellraiser, realizing that while it was gory and disturbing, there was also this incredible vision behind it, and that it was a really, you know, it was a good movie. It was a good movie with meaty themes and beautiful imagery, and that it wasn't just a kind of shameful, sordid thing that I did when my parents left the house watching these horror movies, that there was actually a real artistry there. And it was from there that I started to become really obsessed with it.
Yeah. And mentioning Stephen King, his work has such a distinctive style and tone. So I'm really curious, how did you approach that when you were bringing to life the Boogeyman?
Well, the Boogeyman is kind of like from a different era of Stephen King. It was, it was before Carrie. It was when he was really trying to grab attention, and these stories were being published in Playboy and Cavalier and these like,
Mm-hmm.
nudie magazines that where you really needed something splashy to grab people's attention, and so there's a kind of nastiness to them. There's a kind of garish, like over the topness to them that I wouldn't say it's softened, but I think that in the later novels where he has room for, and more compassion for the characters, it's a different King that emerges, and so we had this short story that's very nasty and leaves a nasty taste in your mouth in a really wonderful way. But we wanted, as we built out the movie, and like 85% of this movie is us extrapolating from the short story. It's our own invention, and so we were trying to call back not just on the short story but on King as a whole. And we, one of the things that we wanted the movie to have was the beating heart of King, as we know and love from the adaptations of his work and his novels. And so we tried in a way to move away from the kind of nihilism of that first short story into something that felt more at home in the wider King universe.
Yeah, definitely. Were there any specific scenes that might have been particularly challenging adapting it from short story to film, and how did you overcome that as a challenge?
Well, I mean, the short story is basically just the one scene. It's it's a therapy session between Lester Billings and Will Harper, and it was we had a different conception for the Lester Billings character, who not to kind of credit the short story with being a takedown of toxic masculinity or anything like that. I mean, you can certainly read it that way in 2023, but it's like that character is loathsome and looking to scapegoat anything but his own parenting for the death of his children. And a lot of the fun of that short story is the kind of notion that maybe he has killed his kids or been responsible, but is blaming this supernatural entity. And then at the end of the short story, he finally concedes to and allows the therapist to convince him into more sessions, and it seems like finally he's ready to open up, and that version of the character felt like we wanted to go in a different direction. We wanted the character to be more sympathetic and more vulnerable and still have that scary, maybe he did it, maybe he's dangerous vibe about him, but in a way that was kind of complemented by this more empathetic flip side. So he was someone who you could relate to and invest in, that then makes what happens to him all the more shocking, and those moments where he turns and gives you a sense of that violence maybe that's within him that feels more potent as well. So it was about finding that balance between our own vision of this character, and David Dastmalchian had such a huge part in that, but then also kind of staying true to the themes of the short story, and part of that was getting it in front of King before we started shooting. He read the script and was really lovely about how we'd built on the themes of the short story, how we'd how we kind of done justice to what he was getting at in that short story, and earned our 90-minute runtime from this 8-page mini story.
Yeah. And I had heard in a previous interview that you had a previous script that was from the perspective of the male character. I'm forgetting names, but you then shifted it and shifted that focal point into the sisters. And I'm curious, like, what drove that adaptation or that shift of focal point?
Yeah, no, that's right. So Beck and Woods, who are fantastic, they'd been developing this a little bit before I came on board. And when they stepped off, there was a period where it looked like the movie was dead, and then I stepped on, and they'd kind of developed it very much in the world of adults. It followed Will Harper, the father, who's who was kind of spent most of the movie in the dark about what was going on with the creature, and it kind of by putting us in the world of adults, it kind of limited what we could do with the creature. It limited the scope of the horror, and it also felt like it wasn't quite doing justice to our title and our concept. You know, the Boogeyman is something that you associate with younger children, and while there is like a parental aspect, there's this, you know, there is this aspect of like, it's kind of how you explain fear and how you explain danger to a kid. It felt like the best version of this movie would be one with younger characters, and so we had originally it was a boy and a girl. It was and so we changed it to be two sisters, which felt mostly that was like a casting decision. I wasn't seeing anyone at that age range, any boys who were kind of bringing what needed what that character needed to bring to the screen, which was really like they needed to be the kind of beating heart of the movie. They were the comic relief of the movie. They needed to have just this infectious personality that the audience could latch onto. And then, you know, when I auditioned Vivian Lyra Blair, it was immediately clear that she would be the audience favorite, that she would, you know, if I did my job right, I'd be able to bring a lot of her personality onto the screen.
Definitely. Yeah, it's an excellent choice there. So you got approval from King, but were there any expectations from Stephen King's fan base that weighed on any decisions during the vision of this film?
I think you know, I try not to think about it. I think it wasn't necessarily people who loved and revered the short story, and I know there are many. It's one of his most beloved short stories, but I felt like it was such a kind of an unobvious choice to adapt this into a feature film, because it's such a slight short story. It's got such a limited scope that I didn't feel like there was going to be a huge amount of preciousness to do with the story. I think just generally, when you have Stephen King's name on something, that the weight of that expectation was hugely felt, and was something that I tried to just put out of mind. You know, when you're sitting in a canon of work that's so renowned, and where you've had so many incredible filmmakers leave a mark there, that's something that can be intimidating if you think on it for too long.
Absolutely. So your previous works were done on Zoom and Dashcam, like previously mentioned. What was that like, switching to this large scale production?
Well, a little terrifying at first. It was, you know, this is my first studio movie. This is my first movie that was made for, you know, the two previous movies that I made were cost less than $1 million combined, and this was like multi-million-dollar studio movie. I'd worked on a decent budget before in the television world, but that's a very different beast. You know, this was coming from something that I developed for many months with the writer, and was something that was had my fingerprints on it. And you know, the weird thing is, and I tell this to film students whenever I talk at universities and you know, talk to filmmakers who are making the step up. I say, you know, when you get into the kind of inner circle and you're working with the actors and the camera and the production designer, it really feels like you're flexing the same muscles. And I think if you can kind of put away the scale of the thing and just focus on the audience experience, that's always going to be the same, because really the audience they don't really care if you're making a movie for pennies or for millions. That it's really about you guiding them through the experience. And so I was amazed by how similar it felt in terms of what the stresses and what the truly important aspects of production were.
Yeah. Is there anything that you might have missed from the previous productions that now you didn't have access to or you couldn't do?
You know what? You know, I think I'm very controlling, and there's always an element of me that wants to just grab the camera and run around and shoot on the fly. You know, like like I was able to do with host and dash cam, and like I did my shorts. And but we had such a great team that there was nothing really that gave me that itch in a big way. And I was actually, kind of the opposite was true. Like I was amazed by how much of that kind of scrappy, low budget DNA was able to make itself into this big studio movie. You know, we were able to like improvise with the actors. I was able to change things in the script on the day, and you know, the studio was supportive, and it wasn't as rigid as I thought it was going to be. And actually, like, you know, because the two movies before this were totally improvised. We had a beat sheet with like bullet points, and so every day on Boogeyman, I would show up a couple of hours before call time, and I just, you know, I'd be alone there, and I'd wander around the set, and I'd come up with new scares, or I'd come up with new moments, and I'd you know, have ideas that I could bring to the cast and the crew, and we'd be able to really make sure that every day we were shooting the best version of the scene, rather than just like, well, it's on paper, so let's follow the plan that we set in motion months and months ago. There was able to be a spontaneity that carried across from the old films.
Yeah, that's wonderful to be able to bring that kind of chaos ultimately, more or less.
It was beautifully chaotic.
Yeah. So I know that you potentially had a paranormal experience while filming Host with the cabinets. I'm curious, was there any spooky, funny, unexpected events that happened on the set of The Boogeyman that you can share?
You know what? I was so exhausted that every time, like, New Orleans is where we shot it, and New Orleans is so haunted. It's unreal. I was so exhausted. I think I probably just my apartment was probably full of poltergeists, but every time I got home, I just collapsed straight away and fell asleep. I know that Sophie and Vivian had weird things going on in their apartment. Sophie was sure that her apartment was haunted. The thing that I find the spookiest was a positive thing. We had the end of the movie, you know, not to spoil it, we have a house that's completely engulfed in fire, and I wanted to do that in camera. And you know, although this is a Disney movie with Disney money, we couldn't just burn a house to the ground. So we built a 3/4 scale model of the house, and we just had it in a field from day one. And it was there for like 8 weeks as we were shooting. And we shot in New Orleans, like I said, and which, you know, has very temperamental weather. And twice our production got shut down because a tornado was heading right at us, and it was tearing through New Orleans. And the path was meant to go straight through the field and completely decimate this beautifully intricate set that we'd been working on for weeks and weeks. And both times, if you look at the path, it went right towards our house and then just veered off at the last second. And it amazingly stayed there through you know, through all this weather. And so I, you know, I like to see that as the film god smiling on us.
Yeah, 100%. That is wild.
Yeah.
That has to be scary. And of course that applies to, you know, your own directing ability. You have very effective scares, I might say.
Thank you.
Have you ever inadvertently scared yourself while working on a scene?
Not while working on a scene, because it's so inherently unscary because of, you know, all the mechanics are laid bare. But actually a lot of time, because I tend to be the first person who shows up and the last person who leaves the set, or, you know, one of a handful. And so a lot of times, like, I'll find myself in these like scary horror locations or sets. All the lights are out. It'll be late at night, and it'll just be me wandering around. And a lot of times on Boogeyman, they, you know, I didn't want to keep anyone, so they would just like, they'd shut all the lights off, because there was this, you had to know how to turn the lights off in the studio. It was a whole thing. So I was just there with a flashlight going around the set, figuring out the next day's scares or the next day's scenes, with only a security guard, you know, miles away patrolling the grounds. And that was really spooky. You know, there was one day where I was walking around and I was using my phone flashlight, and my phone died, and I was just there in the middle of this like really creepy set, not quite knowing which way was the way out, feeling my way through the dark. And yeah, you do sometimes kind of trap yourself in these spooky scenarios. I mean, it's even worse when you're on location, because a lot of times you're in real places. Like
Mm-hmm.
I found myself getting lost one day completely in the dark with just a flashlight in this like old abandoned Victorian animal testing site, this old creaky building, and it was just like horrifying. It's like every stupid horror movie decision was made in that one moment, and I deserve to be picked off.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. uh, so you've stated in previous interviews that horror is at its best when it speaks to things that we don't want to talk about in polite conversation. What is a taboo topic or subject that you wish to explore in future works that you have not had the chance to?
Oh, interesting, interesting. There's there's another movie that I'm doing which is about it's another kind of parental story. It's told more from the perspective of well, no, it's a kind of even split, but it kind of speaks to the idea of what it costs to have a child and what it costs to kind of dedicate your life to looking after a child, and the paths that you have to not take in order to prioritize another human being, and the kind of
Mm-hmm.
the there's a sacrifice to that, and a resentment. That's something uh that's a very it's a thing that nobody really wants to voice, but it's a very real uh it's a very real, deep felt um and valid feeling. One of the reasons that I don't have kids. And then yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think there's just an endless gold mine of material to do with the prospect of death. I mean, that's really the ultimate mine, um, well, to keep going back to. And I think, seemingly every single interview that I do, I talk about this movie Lake Mungo, which I think is one of
Mm-hmm.
the great movies about facing death alone, and the fact that we all, you know, we build connections and communities, but ultimately we go through life on our own. And um that's something that's at the heart of a couple of other ideas. And it is sort of found here in Boogeyman. I mean, Boogeyman um is more about communicating when you're going through these dark times, especially
Yeah.
when you're moving through grief and loss. But it's also, it's also about that fundamental truth that we do go through these things alone. um and as much as we can lean on other people, um we should do so, because it's the only way to kind of lessen that burden.
Absolutely. That's one of the one reasons why I love horror so much is that ability to kind of hit these topics. I mean, death is such a topic no one wants to talk about, but yet it's everyone goes through it. So, it's one of those things that I just appreciate that when horror movies delve into those deep taboo topics. So
Yeah.
I can't wait.
Yeah.
um, you've been attached as director to an adaptation of The Last Days of Jack Sparks by Jason Arnott. Can you share any insights on how that project is going?
Well, it's about to go out to the town. It's got a pilot draft that's written by Gabby Hull, an incredible British writer who's just done the best job on this script. We're working on a couple of other things together, me and Gabby, and I think he's a genius. It's very different from anything I've done before. It's got a vein of black comedy that's really exciting and daunting. I mean, it's a different mode of horror. It's a different mode of storytelling. It's nice to be able to, potentially, if it goes, which I hope it will, it's nice to be able to tell a more drawn out story and have the space and time allowed by TV to do that and to delve into character and plot. And I think it's just going to be really fucking fun and terrifying. And it's been interesting as well. Like, I love the book. I love Jason, and he's been really supportive. And we've kind of adapted it out in interesting ways and fitted it to the TV format in ways that are different from the book. But I think it crystallizes what everyone got so excited about when they first read the book. And yeah, God, I hope we get to make it. It's great.
Awesome. So as a final question, what advice would you give to aspiring writers and filmmakers?
Wow. So I would say one thing is to try and identify areas where you can improve and look objectively at your work. That's one thing. One thing, just having that kind of like self-knowledge when you're putting your work out into the world and you're trying to, you know, grab the attention of the industry and you're trying to take that next step. I've seen a lot of people who expose work to the industry that isn't ready, and where they need to take an honest look at where they're at in their career, and sometimes that can have the opposite of the intended effect. I think one of the things that I do is, like, everything that I make, once I finished it, I try and write up a list of the things that I think I did really well and the things that I want to do better next time. And it's always about evenly split, and it's never the same thing, which is good. So I'm always learning, but I'm always finding new things to learn. I would say if you feel like you're ready to take that step, the thing that I would do that to get the attention of the industry, and that I think is the surest way to make a step up from short films to studio filmmaking, is to make a short 2-minute high concept, scary, polished horror movie that people can share. It's tried and true. David Sandberg has done it and continues to do it. I did it with Salt. It's that's people's attention span. Maybe it's even got less. I mean, I sold Salt 4 years ago, 5 years ago, 4 years ago. So maybe things have changed, but I think that seems to be a surefire way of grabbing people. If you can terrify people in 2 minutes, and there's a concept that could be built out, especially if you've got a script that you want to sell. If you've got a little proof of concept short and you can prove that it connects to an audience and it gets shared around, you're in the best position then to take that out to the town and say, look, it works, and we've got the longer version, and aren't you lucky to have it?
So, what taboo topic would you want to explore that you have yet to?
Oh, geez, I don't know.
That's a very narrow list for JD.
Yeah, I've kind of gone there, I think, on everything. This honestly makes me want to write like a horror short, because in prep for this, I went out and watched Salt, which is his 2-minute little thing that he's got out there. It is crazy good, and I'm guessing he probably filmed this with no budget and an iPhone, but it's phenomenal. It makes me feel like a complete loser, with the stuff that I put on my iPhone. Like, I have no clue how he got some of those camera shots. And then I read the short story for Boogeyman out of Night Shift. Which is one of King's early ones. I think that was his very first short story collection. But yeah, that kind of stuff just makes me Jones to go back and write a short story. And I haven't. I think I've written 2 short stories in my career since I started publishing under my own name. I used to do them years back for magazines and stuff back when I played in that world, but that was like 1990. Like, it's been a very long time. What about you guys?
I don't know that there's any. I don't do well with taboo. It's just not my thing, I guess.
That's fair.
I mean, maybe on the horrors, I've tried. I wrote a horror novel several years ago that has never seen the light of day, and maybe I'd go back and revisit that. And that actually dealt with some like sensitive things, like domestic abuse kind of things that evolved into something more supernatural. So that's probably as close to that kind of taboo as I am going to get.
Very fair.
Do you write a lot of short stories, either of you?
I have. I mean, I went through a whole period for a while there where I was writing a short story every day just to show that I could. And so I still have a backlog of short stories that probably need a lot of editing.
I think Jay Thorne tried that too. I think one story a day.
Yeah. Yep, he did. I am not that advantageous, but I do have some short stories.
I mean, honestly, it seems like a really good idea. I mean, if from a film standpoint, a lot of these get option, and you can cram 10, 15 of them or something into one book. I haven't really explored that, but I think I'm going to.
What do you think the discovery process though would be for that? Like, how does someone who's in the film business discover these short stories these days?
I'm guessing they'd have to be in an anthology, right? Like, I'm on the board with ITW, and we've got an anthology coming out through Audible, and there's, I think, 10 or 15 or so short stories in there. That's going to be fairly high profile. I know if I were to do it, like, I would only put short stories in something that's going to, get a lot of exposure. Rob had mentioned that this story originally was published in like Playboy or one of those magazines, which sounds funny at face value. But back in the day, they paid incredibly well. They paid like $2 a word for short stories. So a lot of authors really clamored for that. That type of market, I don't think exists anymore, right? Like, there's no newspapers anymore or magazines.
I mean, there are like magazines, there's still magazines out there, but I don't know who's discovering whom from these things now. That was always growing up. That was the thing. Like, that was, I submitted hundreds of stories to magazines, including Playboy, in the hopes that I was going to be the next, like, Stephen King or whatever. But
right. And I mean, like, this movie is based off a short story that was written in like 1973 by Stephen King. So there's a lot of big hurdles that this short story took to get to present day anyway. For me, in the realm of taboo, of course, like the realm of queer horror is kind of rising. There's a lot of more queer horror authors that are coming out. Love to continue to explore that. And then some of the like topics, because I write queer stories, would be like the later in life coming out stories. Those are kind of not told as often, but usually when someone like has a family or has a kid and then they realize something about themselves and then they come out at that age, those stories aren't often told. And so that's something I kind of want to explore sometime in the future. Next question. Rob's previous movies were filmed on Zoom and a dash cam. Looking back to the first years of your writing career, is there anything from process to tools that you wish you could go back to using?
I'm still totally in awe that this guy could do any of what he did with an iPhone camera. Like,
right?
That is amazing. I mean, back when I worked in the music business, I mean, we did some sketchy stuff to get music videos down. But that was a different world. I mean, most of the shots were extremely fast. The camera bouncing around all over the place. So if you got shot something with a camcorder, you could sneak that footage in there. But iPhones, I guess at this point, they're literally shooting as well as a regular film camera. Like, you cannot tell the difference between them anymore. I mean, again, like if you're listening to this podcast, just jump on YouTube and watch Salt. It's only 2 minutes long. But you will be amazed at what this guy pulled off.
I forget who I was talking to that told me that they were watching like a behind the scenes for Stranger Things, and that there were a ton of scenes shot on an iPhone for that series. I'm this huge, like, I'm a big geek about using your iPhone for like literally everything. I talk about this all the time at conferences and things. And, I've written entire novels on my iPhone using my thumbs. I've done that. And I can't even say it was a bad experience. It was actually kind of a freeing experience. Like, I could literally write like reclined in a chair or walking or whatever. It was just a really nice experience overall. But that whole iPhone thing, the whole smartphone thing in particular, like, it just, there are regions in our world now that skipped the computer revolution and jumped right to smartphones, and they're now using these things for everything, like small businesses and writing novels and creating. I've written, created covers, published, created video promos. I've done all the things that I would do while sitting at a very expensive computer. I've done with this device in my pocket. I think it's just incredible what you can do with it. And the camera is amazing.
The tech across the board. Yeah. I mean, if you think about it, like, shots that, from the air, like, you used to have to rent a helicopter, the weather had to be just right. Like, that was an expensive ordeal. If I remember correctly, the first Steadicam was actually invented for Rocky, right? To capture him running like on.
Is that right?
I'm pretty sure that was the first shot. And like, if you can find video of that, well, it probably was shot on film. I don't know if there even was video at the time, but like, it was this monster rig. It was like basically a backpack that you hung from your chest to balance this camera that probably weighed 40 or 50 pounds. Yeah. And like now, like my wife, like I was just talking to her about this, after watching Salt, like she's got a Steadicam for her iPhone that she bought on Amazon that cost, $150 or something, and works just as well, if not better. yeah, so it's just crazy. I mean, so like it's just the cost behind it has just been reduced to the point where, you know, anybody who's got a vision can create.
I was a producer and a sometimes camera guy on a documentary series for PBS called Honor Squadrons. And there was a point at which I was wedged into the nose of a B-25 bomber with this camera that weighed almost as much as I did. And so there was very little room to move, but I'm supposed to, you know, I've got two sets of shots. One of them is shooting out of that nose cone and the other is shooting back through the plane and having to reorient that. Like doing that was 12 hours of work with that thing. And that camera cost me, you know, it was going to cost us $150,000 if anything happened to it. Actually, probably much more than that. And so today I could do that shot like comfortably with my iPhone and get better quality footage with this iPhone camera, like higher resolution than I was getting back then. It's just blows my mind, man. It kind of makes me almost want to go back in the TV. Just almost, not quite.
So one thing Rob was talking about was how when he got the script, it was originally in the therapist's point of view, which is how the short story was written. It was kind of all within a therapy office, short story completely in that point of view. And he wanted to change that focal point and switch it to the two sisters, really focusing on kind of that childhood fear and drawing. Have you ever in your work had like a first draft come through and you're like, man, I need to change POV, or man, I need to change focal point? And what did that look like for you guys?
I've had that happen before, but it's usually pretty early on in the process. You know, by the time I'm done with the first chapter, I have a good handle on where I want to go with that. I've run into that though with a ton of mentoring students. You know, it's not told from the right point of view. I've been playing with ChatGPT a lot lately, and a couple of things that I found that it can actually do is you can take like just drop your book in there a couple chapters at a time and tell it to strip out everything but dialogue, which is a great way to just kind of look at a book. And the cool thing about doing that is ChatGPT, it basically puts the name of the character, then a colon, and then the text for their dialogue right behind it. So you can tell whether you actually wrote it correctly. Because a lot of times when the POV is wrong, you know, the dialogues, you think it's coming from one person, it's actually coming from another. So it's an easy way to catch it. But I tend to work on a percentage basis. So if I notice that, you know, 60% of the dialogue is from one character and 40% is from another, the point of view should be from whoever's got the 60%, whoever's got the biggest portion of that scene. So it's kind of an easy way to kind of get there.
That's interesting. Yeah, no, I've decided to go back and rewrite all my books in second person.
You should go ahead and do that. That sounds wonderful.
I have done something similar though. I mean, there's a novel I wrote in first person that it just never really worked for me. I got all the way through the book and just never felt like it clicked. And so I have been kicking around, going back and rewriting it from third person. I tried a few scenes and I think it works. So I haven't, quite made that leap yet, but I think I'm going to.
It's funny. I actually recommend for a lot of people, I tell them to go the other way around because a lot of times characters come across as really dry, real cardboard. So if I force somebody to rewrite that story in first person, now it's basically, I did this, I did that. And just by forcing that, you basically come across as more of a lifelike character. It sounds like, they're literally telling their own story now.
What I felt was that I kept having to pull little tricks to hide, keep from revealing things that too soon. So I had to do these like ham-fisted tricks, and that's what I think made it clunky. The whole book is very clunky. But if I can switch the POV a little, pull back a little, it'd be really easy to gloss over certain facts and just hide the reality and let it unfold naturally. That's my gut instinct.
Or make a first person POV that is lying to the reader.
Yes, the unreliable narrator. I like that idea actually, but maybe I'll do that. I don't know. We'll see. I don't know. I don't want to get to the end. It feels a little Deus Ex to me when you get to the end of a book like that and you find out like, oh, he was lying the whole time. Now I don't know what to believe.
Oh, you little schmuck. Yeah. There was one bit of advice he tossed in at the end there that I enjoyed and I have yet to do, where it's looking back at something you just completed and taking note as to what you did good and what you could work on. when you finish a project, do you reflect on it, and what does that process look like for you guys?
I don't make mistakes. So,
okay. Perfect.
I mean, I do something similar to this for marketing. So whenever I've got a new project coming out, like my new book, Behind a Closed Door, I made a list of everything I see people doing to market their books today. And right next to that, I've got another list of things that I don't see anybody doing. And that's basically what I plan to do to market this book. So that's always worked very well for me. I've never actually torn apart something like that I've written. Maybe I should. Maybe you never know. I do it, again, with mentoring students, with book doctor stuff. I do that kind of thing all the time, but I've never actually tried it with my own stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I've never really done that. I mean, I loop back and I do some reading and rewriting as I go, and sometimes I'm not afraid to kill the little darlings at all. Like I'll rip those suckers out of there screaming if I think it's just not working. But I've never finished a book and attacked it critically like that. Not really.
Yeah, I think it's a media thing. Like for a book, if you run into it, you find a chapter that's not working, chances are you're not going to just leave it in there. You're going to change it or you're going to take it out. But writing a book, you can do that much easier, I think, than you can with a film or a TV show. Somebody like Rob directing a feature film, I'm sure there's a lot of people in his ear, a lot of people, watching the budget, watching this, watching that, telling him what to do. And it's such a big entity. I think it's a different environment. So you can sit down at the end of that in a screening room and going, maybe we should have tried this or maybe we should have tried that. But yeah, with a book, I think you can make a lot of those changes on the fly.
Yeah. I know, like with some of the first series I have, reflecting on it now, I have like a little mental tally of things that like I would quote unquote do better this time if I wrote it with the mind state I have now. So that's kind of like how I keep track of this, but it's all a mental tally. So I like the idea of potentially coming back a few months later and just writing down like, what do I know now? And working from there.
Would you do that with like an early book altogether? Like go back to the beginning on a book?
Well, like it's a series, for example. I wouldn't go back to the beginning and edit it. And no, absolutely not. But I think I like knowing that book is a reflection of a point in time in which I was as good as I was, and then knowing how to make something like that story, but better moving forward. Yeah,
I like that.
I'm going through something similar right now because I've got options on just about everything other than Forsaken, and She Has a Broken Thing Where Her Heart Should Be. So I've dusted off Forsaken, and like I've got no desire to rewrite the book for the same reason you just mentioned. Like that was my writing at that particular time. But I'm thinking about putting the screenplay together for it. So like that could be my opportunity to change some of the things that I would have liked to change, looking back at the book.
Is there anything about that you cringe over? When you think, oh, people are going to read that and now I'm going to be marked for life.
I don't know about that. I think, the writing, my writing has just gotten tighter, little things, like the word just, I used to use it a lot. And then autocrit started yelling at me. So I just, started taking it out with autocrit. And now I can go chapters without, mentioning that word. It is another one, like I used to use the word it quite a bit. And like, I can go a chapter without, mentioning that word again. So you when you go back and you read the old stuff, you see all those things, those problems that you fixed over time popping back up and rearing their ugly head. Even today I read Boogeyman that Stephen King wrote in 1970 something. It's a totally different writing style than what he has now. I mean, if you didn't know who King was and you put the two, put that side by side with I've got Holly, his latest books on my coffee table. You put the two next to each other and don't tell anybody who it is. They wouldn't know that it's the same person.
Right. Yeah. I cringe over a lot of the stuff that I wrote early on, but it still gets good reviews and still gets a lot of positive, feedback. So I try not to be too hard on myself, but I don't know. I can't help it. I'm like, oh, I remember I did that. I said this thing, or I included that scene or that character, and I did actually re-edit, my first archaeological thriller. Cause when I originally wrote it, the challenge for me was I'd never written a thriller. And so I was trying to I cobbled together a bunch of story starters I had. And I had one in there that I always felt like there was something a little off about that one. It was it was one vignette too far. And so I came back maybe 4 years later and re-edited the book and took that one and made it a bonus chapter at the end instead of part of the prologue, which I know prologues are a whole other thing, but that was probably the closest I've ever come to rewriting an entire book so far.
Just whispered so far.
Frankly, if you open a book that you wrote 10 years ago and thought that it was perfect today, meaning your writing hasn't evolved or changed in any way, there's probably another problem going on there.
Oh, yeah.
Right.
Yep.
Right.
Yep. You should always be learning and always improving.
Absolutely.
We can't all be J.D. Barker.
No.
No mistakes.
But we can be.
No regrets.
We can all be Kevin Tomlinson.
Unfortunately for most writers, you can actually be J. Kevin Tomlinson.
All right, everybody. We're going to wrap this one up. Again, special bonus episode. Hope you enjoyed it. If you haven't had a chance to get out to the theaters and see Boogeyman, absolutely get out there and do that. Not only is it a fantastic movie, is it going to get you to jump and scream in your chair, but we need to get some people back in the theaters, right? So this is a good one. Good date movie.
Yeah.
Yeah. Go get terrified.
Go get terrified.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Writers Inc. Access the show notes and leave a comment at writersincpodcast.com.